when Mullen was there, he braced his opposite numbers in the Israeli leadership, and he said, look, don't even think of any tricks in the Persian Gulf or anything that would provoke the Iranians so that they would attack you, and then you would expect us to come in. We're not going to come in if you provoke the attack. And then, the real blitz, Jason. You know what he brought up? He brought up the...
Well, bring it up on the other side, because we're just about to go to break. We're with Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst, Infowars.com, PrisonPlanet.com. This is the Alex Jones Show, PrisonPlanet.tv. All right, folks, we are back. It's the Alex Jones Show. I'm Jason Bermas, subbing in. I'm a filmmaker. I've made Fabled Enemies, Loose Change 2nd Edition, Loose Change Final Cut. I'm currently working on Invisible Empire, and I hope that you go to Infowars.com right now and order copies, make copies, hand them out. This is vital information. We're with Ray McGovern, 26-year CIA veteran, and he's discussing with us the military personnel who have returned home and said no war with Iran, and you were just discussing a gentleman who had just returned from Israel and said the same thing, Ray.
Yes, this was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Jason, Mike Mullen, an admiral who was out there in June, actually, and told the Israelis, not only do we not want a new war with Iran, but don't even think about trying to provoke one by doing something to let the boom go up. Now, what I was trying to say is he did something incredibly gutsy, something that no U.S. statesman has done in 41 years, and that is he raised the incident of the U.S. Liberty ship that was deliberately attacked by Israel on the 8th of June, 1967, with 34 crewmen killed, 174 wounded. It was an incredible attack, and we have bulletproof evidence that it was intentional. Exactly why the Israelis did it is a matter of some speculation.
You're talking about the USS Liberty, of course.
Yes. And what Mullen said was, he said, look, we don't want any more USS Liberty-type incidents. Ooh. Now, why was that so powerful? Because the Israelis know that Mullen knows, as a naval officer, what happened back on that terrible day, June 8th, 1967, and that Mullen was not going to let it happen again. That's about as direct, that's about as clear a message as you can send to the Israeli leaders. And right after that, we saw a slight attenuation of the propaganda out of Israel and out of the United States with respect to what a terrible threat Iran is or was, but really isn't. Now, the next big factor that has made it unlikely that we will be striking Iran by air is Russia, the Russian bear. And we talk about the bear market. Well, I'm talking about the Russian bear who has it up to here now with his nose being tweaked. What happened was the Russians saw Israel and saw us, that is Cheney and Elliot Abrams and those types in the White House, as being behind that idiot Saakashvili's attack on South Ossetia. Now, why was that important? Well, the Russians are up to here, and they said, look, not only are we going to repel this attack, and they did so brutally, I don't hold any grief for that, not only are we going to repel the attack, but don't even think about Georgia becoming part of NATO or the Ukraine. And besides, Israelis, if you thought that you could use Georgian airfields to attack Iran, look at the map, you folks. It was the only feasible way without flying over Iraq and other countries who would deny overflight permission. Coming down from Georgia would have been quite feasible, and that, according to some reports, is what the Israelis had in mind. So the Russians came down real hard. Olmert went up to Russia. Other people went up to Russia, and they said, look, it's all over. No, don't even think about attacking Iran. And they said the same thing to us. And again, we intelligence analysts look at all sources, and we saw a very sharp fall-off of all the warnings out of the White House about how bad Iran is, how it's supplying our opponents in Iraq, and how it's developing. They all fell right off in early August, and it's still pretty far down. Two other factors I mentioned briefly. AIPAC, the American Israel political, political something committee, they drafted legislation. Actually, this is not so bizarre. They do this regularly. They drafted legislation which formed the substance of bills in the House and in the Senate, which amounted to calling for President Bush to blockade Iran, an act of war, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, traditionally, when the Israelis draft this kind of legislation, they put the word out, and 100 representatives, co-sponsor the thing, like before you could say Jack Robinson, okay? And that happened. But guess what? And the same thing happened in the Senate. Guess what? Grassroots folks inundated their representatives with calls, with emails, with faxes, and everything else, and got them thinking. And actually, some of the co-sponsors withdrew their sponsorship of that bill because they were afraid that, indeed, the president would be encouraged. Here's Congress telling him to make an act of war on Iran. I think they also didn't want to fall victim to what I call the Hillary Clinton factor. Hillary actually thought it would be a smart political move when she voted for the war against Iran.
All right, hold that thought, Ray. We're going to be with you after the break. We're going to take your calls. Ray McGovern, CIA analyst. It's the Alex Jones Show. PrisonPlanet.com, PrisonPlanet.tv.
Baby, I'm going to leave you.
All right, folks, we're back. It's the Alex Jones Show. I am Jason Bermas, sitting in for Alex Jones. We are with Ray McGovern. We're discussing the upcoming election. And he just mentioned that Hillary Clinton was a bit of a warmonger against Iran. I mean, she's pretty much said everything was on the table. I want him to finish up his point on that. And then I want to get his take on this coming international crisis that people like Joe Biden, Colin Powell, and now a key member of the Pentagon advisory panel are talking about. I want to know whether he thinks this is a reality. Is this something that's coming up? I mean, obviously, with the bailout and the economy, anything's possible. But why don't you finish up your point and then comment on that?
Sure. Yeah. The business about the attack on Iran being off the table, probably. I just finish up by saying that it was a grassroots effort, but many of the congressmen who actually had co-sponsored the bill withdrew that co-sponsorship, and I think it wasn't altogether altruistic. I think they were thinking about 2 years from now when they're running again, and there's a wider war still, and they voted for it. What I call the Hillary Clinton effect would set in. You'll recall that back in October 2002, she thought it was the politically smart thing to do to vote for a war. Turned out to derail her attempt to be president. It will derail the attempts of others to be representatives or senators if they voted for a wider war, and that's why the whole thing was squashed. And this is the first time in recent memory that I've seen a grassroots effort able to defeat legislation not only proposed by, but drafted by AIPAC. And the last thing, of course, is the financial crisis. I think everybody kind of realizes that we've run out of money. We're spending billions in Iraq and Afghanistan every week. So where do we get the money to get involved in a war with Iran, which is not at all like Iraq or Afghanistan, but rather a very, very strong country with lots of armed forces that dwarf in effectiveness what Saddam Hussein had before we attacked Iraq.
So do you think there's a chance of this international crisis that Biden and Powell and other people in the Pentagon are now talking about in the first months of his presidency, if he gets in?
Well, Joe Biden is not one of my favorites. He kind of runs off the mouth without thinking about what he's going to say. And we're also dealing again here with the political rhetoric rather than reality. My guess is that Biden was just trying to draw a parallel between Obama and JFK.
See, even you did it. We can't just accuse the neocons now. That's all right. Continue.
My apologies.
That's all right.
The senior moments here. It's always politically good to compare your candidate with John Kennedy, for whom lots of people have continuing respect, including myself. And we all know, at least those of us old as I am, that Kennedy was confronted. He was young, and he was confronted by Khrushchev. He was actually confronted by the CIA. He was confronted by our military when they decided to go through with that Bay of Pigs foolishness, and then expected Kennedy to bail him out by sending the Air Force in to save these guys. They mousetrapped him. And so he was beset by all kinds of challenges, not only from Khrushchev in Vienna in May of 1961, but also the Bay of Pigs before that. And, there was the Berlin, the trouble over Berlin access and everything else. So my guess, and it's only a guess, is that what Biden was referring to is, look, Kennedy initially braced and shocked by all this, came through, and even when the challenge to us in Cuba with the Russians sending missiles down there, when that happened, he was able to handle that in a cool and collected way, but a strong way, and he made the Russians back down. That's the memory most of us have of JFK.